Hey guys, it's Magna back here for episode 10 of Starcraft Q&A. It is March 30th. The beta is supposed to come out tomorrow for Legacy of the Void, so this might be the last Q&A for the next little while, but we will see how the beta goes. I'm expecting to be able to get in on the first wave, considering they said at BlizzCon that BlizzCon ticket holders would get first access, so we'll have to see. And by the way, here's my shirt from BlizzCon. I'm all ready for Legacy of the Void, and by the way, it's a total coincidence that I'm wearing this today, so don't read into that too much. Alright, so let's get on with questions here. My music seems to have gotten really quiet all of a sudden. They said, I have a question about ZVP. I understand now that you should always have a transition ready when meeting a Protoss, but one thing I have wondered about is the upgrades. When you meet Protoss, what upgrade should you go for and when? If I go for melee upgrades, it will only affect my Lings and it's easily countered by Colossus, and it will affect the Ultralisk, but I will only get those out on the field very late. I have seen people go for upgrades very late, or first go for range and then melee. I feel like I can't focus on one composition very hard because then I'm not prepared to switch from it, so what should I do? So, you should first just decide how you want to play ZVP, because typically when you play a matchup, you only really play one build. You don't play, like 3 or 4 different styles typically, because then you do 3 or 4 different styles not very well, as opposed to doing one pretty well. So, I would first decide what type of style you want to go for, and you can kind of center it around pretty much any Zerg unit right now, with the exception of something like Zerglings, because, like you said, they're just going to die really easily. So if you want to go for Ultralisk builds, you can get there and focus on melee upgrades if you want to, but a lot of times the Ultralisks are just for tanking, they're not really for damage output, so typically with like an Ultralisk type of build, you'll get ranged upgrades for Hydras anyway, since you'll wind up on a composition typically of Hydra Ultra. If you want to do something like Mutalisk, then you can stay on melee upgrades, but then you're going to be upgrading your Mutalisks as well. So you typically only go for like one Carapace and then one Spire upgrade at a time. And your transitions off of Mutalisk can be anything. They can be Ultras, they can be Infestors, they can be Hydras. Typically, Corruptors are a good support, and a lot of people will just try to starve out a Protoss by just having Corruptor Muta that they can't deal with. So you kind of just first need to establish what type of style you're going to go for, and then just get the upgrades that make sense. Don't try to switch too hard between really vastly different compositions, because you can't really go from Roach Hydra into something like Ultralisk. That doesn't really work, because their counters for Roach Hydra still work against Ultralisk. So I would just try to focus on what style you want to do, and just get upgrades that are appropriate to that. And I listed some examples, but I think you should be able to kind of stay centered on one thing that you want to do, and just get the upgrades that make sense for that. You typically want to have 2 upgrades going at a time. Like you said, melee is pretty rare unless you're going for Ultralisk builds, but the Ultralisk builds have to be focused to get the Ultralisks out. It can't just be kind of like a, oh, by the way, I'm getting Ultralisks type of deal. So this person says, hi Magnet, how many and what kind of unit should I have when I want to expand to a third? About 13 minutes when Zerg already has a third up and is going with many roaches. This is a Protoss player, by the way, considering it's on this Protoss video. They said, or what's the wisest way to expand to a third base against Zerg? So 13 minutes is really late for a third base. I would try to expand to a third a lot earlier than that, something like 8 or 9 minutes. That way you can have that base mining, and you'll have basically already paid for it by the time that 13 minutes would have rolled around anyway. So try to expand faster. You typically want to expand with things like sentries, so you can force field stuff off, or a lot of Stargate units, robo units, stuff like that. If you don't want to do any of that, you can also go down the blink and really fast attack upgrade route. It's +2 blink, if you do it correctly, can hold pretty much anything. This person says, do you think that bioplay will still be an option with the addition of units such as the Disruptor, Lurker, and Ravager? Tank being picked up in siege mode, stuff like that. If so, do you think bio will now require insane APM on top of the already high APM, or will bio just have to pick apart the opponent with non-stop drops? I know a lot of people are concerned about this, but I like to put people in the mindset of the fact that bio should have always been a sort of pick your opponent apart type of unit composition, because it's super weak. It's not really weak, it's just low hit points for what you're carrying around, which typically means that if you bludgeon them up into a bigger army, you should lose because all of your units will die so fast. So bio has always supposed to be kind of a pick your opponent apart type of composition, and it will be harder in Legacy of the Void, and I think that's on purpose, because a lot of people being able to just blob up bio and attack with it probably shouldn't be able to get away with that, considering the kind of theme and the style behind what bio is supposed to be. So I think it's going to be a lot more dropping and picking them apart, and a lot about making their army move out of position with various different things. I think a lot of people are going to find bio a little frustrating and switch into different compositions. So you're probably going to see a lot more of mixed compositions, such as things like maybe a Marauder Hellbat with some support. That was a little bit popular at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, not so much now. You're going to see more mech play. You'll see maybe even weird like Sky Terran play. It kind of depends on how that all plays out. But I'm really hoping to see a lot more versatility in that matchup, at least against Protoss, and I guess less or so against Zerg, because mech is a more common thing against Zerg. But yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more variety, and I think people are going to purposefully go off of bio because of those new units. So I wouldn't be too worried, but I would be in a mindset that you'd need to be willing to change your playstyle for Legacy of the Void if you've been running bio like all along, and you don't typically do the drop style. This person says, whenever I see a pro player in first person, he's always jumping between groups of units or buildings at insane rates. How can I improve my ability to jump between different groups? I use the number of hotkeys, pretty much just 1 through 6, so should I work on being able to use more command groups and the button to swap between hatcheries? The first thing that will get you around the map faster is using camera hotkeys, and those are typically mapped to F5 through F8, but a lot of people don't like those, so they change them to something else, like F1 through F4, for example. Those will get you around the map a lot faster, but the way that when you see a pro player play, like part of the reason somebody is a pro is because they're just faster than everyone else. And a game that comes down to being able to do a lot of things in a short period of time, the faster players are going to rise up to the top way fast. Like, not to reuse the same word over and over, but they're going to rise up to the top considerably more rapidly than somebody that's a lot slower. So I would just get comfortable with the hotkey setup that you're used to, and then start trying to add in little things. Like you can map tilde, which is the like wavy button next to the 1. You could map that to a controlled group, for example, if you needed something that's easy to get to. You could remap F1 through F4, since you typically don't want to be using things like F2 anyway to grab your whole army. F1 is useful, so you could probably keep F1, but just use F2 through F4, for example, for camera hotkeys. Just keep finding different ways to kind of add in little bits to your game that will go a long way, and it'll just become more and more comfortable the more you play. You're probably never going to have the speed of a pro player, simply because almost nobody has that speed except for the people that get paid to play the game. So I would just try to focus on adding one key here and there just to try to help increase your speed. This person says, I also have another question or comment. In almost every high-level TVs that I see is a bio army versus a Lingbane Muta or a Baneling bust. It makes these games very boring, as they are very much the exact same thing every time. What are your thoughts on this and the changes that Legacy of the Void will bring? Legacy of the Void is going to change TVZ a lot, and that's mainly for the new stuff that Zerg is getting, but also for the fact that Terran's getting a lot more mech stuff, and they're encouraging people not to do the blobby bio style like I was talking about before. So I think that you're going to see a lot more strategy diversification, kind of more like a PVZ is right now, wherein each side has like 3 legitimate routes they could play, as opposed to just maybe 1 or 2 in like 95% of the games. So you're going to see that change quite a bit. We're just going to have to wait and see, because the beta is going to change a lot on its own. But hopefully I'll have games for these matchups, and we'll see how they work. This person says, last question from him apparently. Besides your experience in Wings of Liberty and Brood War and passion for the game, what's your secret in learning so many stuff about this game to make videos about any race and possibly anything related to them? How do you study it? I was actually not super into Brood War. I played Brood War just casually and got really interested in the fact that there were pro games at the very, very end of Brood War's life, like literally the last couple of months. Throughout Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm, I've watched an ungodly amount of pro games, and that's typically how you start to learn about the game and figure out what's good and what's not. So I've watched probably like maybe 80% of what the GSL has put out over the years, which has been like a 4-year running league. I watch a lot of Pro League. I don't typically watch things that are outside of Korea just because it's basically the same stuff except for the players aren't as good. So if you really want to study the game really well, I would look into watching VODs for things like Pro League and SSL, which are both Korean leagues. And if you're really serious about it, you could get to a GSL subscription, which is like $20 a season or something like that for like 4 months worth of super top tier games. So I just watched all those games and I kind of figure out what they're doing and realize what works and what doesn't, and kind of absorb the information that way, I guess. This person asks if I can do game commentaries. So this is going to kind of get into the identity of my channel. When I first started out, I wanted to do game commentaries from players that are in lower leagues, partially to help them and partially just to see if it's entertaining or not. And that didn't last very long because people don't really care that much about lower league game commentaries. They want to see the highest level and not much else. What I'm going to be doing though is my plan for Legacy of the Void is I will play a lot of Legacy of the Void games on random, so I will stream that. And then the interesting games I'm going to pull and kind of talk over the replay and explain to people what's going on in the game so they can see the cool stuff that happened from my stream, to kind of condense all the cool stuff that happened down to a few interesting games. So I will do game commentaries in the very near future. It might be on my own games or it might be on someone else's from the beta. I haven't really started to set up connections to get replays from people from the beta, but I'm going to start looking into that probably like tomorrow, considering that's when the beta is going to open. I'm going to see who has it and who's active and try to see if I can get replays from them. So I'll put up a whole bunch of games and we'll learn a whole bunch of stuff. This person says, "Hey Magnet, I've learned a bunch from your videos. Been having trouble with PvZ and Mutalisks and being able to counter it. You're not alone in that boat. That's probably the hardest game situation in the whole game. I try to go into Blinkstalkers and Phoenix, but as I'm transitioning into Phoenix, he switches to Ultralisks. Yes, that's very hard. Seeing that I have a large stalker count due to warp-ins at harass locations, the Ultras deal with me no problem, and Phoenix are obviously useless." So the weird thing with any Muta build is you have to... I made a whole video about it, so I think the first thing you should do is go watch the PvZ Mutalisk video. It's in the Protos playlist. It's one of the very first ones I made after I got through all the general stuff. And that's just because it's such a common situation. It's one of the hardest situations to play yourself out of. But in a nutshell, you have to get Phoenix. There's no choice but to get Phoenix, and that has to be your primary response to dealing with the mutas. And I'm not talking like one Stargate Phoenix and like pepper them in every once in a while. You need like 2 or 3 Stargates with range to start dealing with the Mutalisks. And then it's up to you to really stay on top of those switches, or to abuse them really hard when they start to lose a lot of Mutalisks. So if they start to lose a lot of mutas, you need to do counterattacks. You need to get your Phoenix out there and kill drones or overlords. And if you're going to be in their base and attacking while they're losing Mutalisks, or while they've basically given that control up, then you're going to see what they're switching into and have an okay amount of time to respond to it. But it's kind of on you while all that is going on to figure out what they're doing behind it. So you're going to have to send in hallucinations or send your Phoenix over there periodically, maybe do counterattacks with Zealot warpins and stuff and see what comes to kill it if it's not the Mutalisks. But counterattacks and stuff like that are what's going to really start to get you back in the game. And especially if you can ever get on top of killing a big bunch of mutas, then he's pretty useless and you can kind of be really aggressive about it. So this person says, as Protos is keeping Warp Gate on cooldown and Chrono Energy near 0... Oh, this is kind of strangely worded, I'm sorry. So they're asking if keeping Chrono Energy down is considered optimal macro. And they use the example of saying, with Zerg, keeping Queen Energy near 0, having no idle larva, and keeping money low is optimal macro. And with Terran, dropping mutals when energy allows and keeping 100% uptime on production buildings while not getting supply blocked is considered optimal. But even at the pro levels, you see players keeping warp gates idle, warping units at random times, and have lots of unspent chrono energy. Is it sloppy macro, and if not, then why does Protoss work like this? So Protoss is a really wishy-washy race, in the sense that Terran does need to keep stuff going all the time, Zerg needs to keep larva and everything going all the time. Protoss is weird though, because you can spend buckets of Protoss money in no time at all. They're probably a race that you can spend the money the fastest and get the results almost right away, with the whole warp gate mechanic and whatnot. So it is really good to try to have chrono energy spent into stuff, but once you get up to like 4 Nexuses, it's almost impossible to actually keep that going. And a lot of people will make more gateways in the late game especially than they really need, just because they need massive amounts of reinforcement. So let's say in the late game, for example, you could have 3/3 upgrades, you could have pretty much all your tech ready, you could have 2 or 3 robos, you could have 16 gateways, you could have all this stuff. And that's not bad, because their concern at that point is being able to reinforce as strongly as possible. And all that really matters is that they're spending all their money. I would only call it sloppy macro if they're trying to go for a very upgrade-centric timing, and they're being hurt by it quite a bit by not spending their chrono appropriately. So that's the only time I would really say that it's not very good. But other than that, it's hard to tell, especially in casts, because people don't really pay attention to upgrades being chronoed, considering it's not really a very interesting thing to look at. But I would definitely say that it is sloppy to bank it at times when you're not maxed out and when you're not in deep late game and stuff like that. But if you're in deep late game, you have tons of idle warp gates, it's okay, because it's more so about being able to rebuild on a moment's notice than making sure that you're absolutely perfect on your spending versus your idle gateways and stuff like that. Kind of a weird explanation, a long one, but hopefully that makes sense. Hey Magnet, where do you think sentries will fit in PvZ with the addition of the Ravager? Will they still be viable, or will they be like white crayons? I can set Guardian Shield and Hallucination. I can get Guardian Shield and Hallucination. They're both good, but as a side note, when Legacy of the Void, I think that's just kind of the end of the question. So let's answer the first one first. One thing that people don't realize is that Guardian Shield is always useful, and it's not harped on enough to keep a Guardian Shield always active on your army at pretty much all times. I see people being kind of sloppy about that all the time, and it's even when I play games, it's hard to keep that up. So sentries will always be useful just for that Guardian Shield ability, and even if you just have one just for that, then it'll be fine. Hallucinations are also good because they're basically free scouts, so I think sentries will fit in the entire game basically all the time by having 2, maybe 3, even if you're not planning on relying on them for force fields. As far as Ravagers, it's going to remain to be seen, because breaking force fields does nullify a lot of their defense mechanisms for holding third bases and stuff like that, but the difference is that we don't know if Ravagers are going to be all that stable, and we don't know if they're going to be something that you can abuse if like if a Zerg starts to stockpile a lot of Ravagers. If you can just kill them with a Blink All-In or something, then you might not see too many Ravager overly reliant builds. But the Ravager's balance is going to change a lot, so we're just going to have to see. But I think Protoss should always probably have 2 or 3 sentries at pretty much all times, just for Guardian Shields and just for hallucination scouting. So they'll always be in the game for that reason, no matter what. This person also says, as a side note, when Legacy of the Void comes out, will all the people not invited to closed beta just be out of luck when the time comes that it's released? No, because what they'll always do is they'll have a closed beta where they just invite people in waves at a time, and then they'll have an open beta where they just let anybody play. And yeah, I think it'll be I'm trying to think back to the other ones if they actually had an official open beta, and I'm pretty sure they did. So I'm guessing that there'll eventually be an open beta that you can play before the game is actually released. But just go into the battle.net site into your account and make sure that you have Starcraft checked for beta testing, and you should get an invite sooner or later. This person says, with the Ravager being Legacy of the Void, it might be a good idea to nerf the Roach's stats but cut its supply to 1. I feel the lack of a 1 supply unit for Zerg causes them to struggle at 200-200 while the other races and forces mass static defense and free unit abuse, such as Swarm Hosts and Horde of the Swarm and Infested Terrans and Wings of Liberty, just to create extra artificial supply. I would like to hear your thoughts. I don't think that they're interested in changing the game that dramatically, because 1 supply Roaches would be crazy, and you did say to nerf the Roaches stats, but then that totally changed the game, and they're not really on board with totally changing how core units work. For example, you're probably never going to see a change to anything involving Stalkers or Marines, basically ever, just because they're such a core unit that they're really not going to do much with that. As far as Zerg struggling with max army versus other races, that's kind of intentional because Zerg has the fastest replenish rate out of any race. Literally, if you keep up on your larva and you lose a fight on the enemy side of the map, you could have an entirely done full army by the time they got to your side of the map, and that's just absolutely crazy for someone to try to fight into. So Zerg isn't more so about supply efficiency, they're more about just being able to recreate an army at a moment's notice. So I'm not too worried, but it does kind of feel like they are making Zerg a little bit more bulky than they need to be. So I guess, I mean, I don't want to say we'll see what happens, because I don't think that you're going to see anything change, but one interesting thing is they are realizing that their only real one supply unit, which it's not even that, is the Zergling, and they're realizing that it does get really useless by the end of the game anyway, so they're trying to find new ways to mix that in as well. So we'll have to see if Zerglings become more of a thing. This person says, I'm a new player in Bronze League, and when I'm in a TVT, I find that either me or my opponent have these long standoffs. It's usually them turtling their base with siege tanks, so no one makes the first move. I can't do drops because the opponent has missile turrets all over the base, and I can't move in because I'll get obliterated. The opponent would usually be more clever, and I'll lose to Banshee Harass or drops because my whole army is out of position, or I'll be too impatient and I'll just run in. So what do I do? So like you said, the opponent always has tons of missile turrets, so if you're losing to drops or Banshee Harass, then you should probably be adding a lot of missile turrets as well. But by the time it gets to that stage in TVT, rather than adding more production for more factory units, you should actually just add a bunch of starports. And the reason being is because late game TVT is basically a air army versus air army. It's Raven Viking battlecruiser versus Raven Viking battlecruiser. And if you got to that stage faster than your opponent, then all their tanks would just be worthless anyway. And you could start to bleed them off, or maybe just hold a contain or something so they couldn't leave, and then be able to resupply in a unit composition that's going to go a lot further once you're on 4, 5, 6, and 7 bases, versus your tanks, which are basically good to hold about 3, and that's about it. So you want to think about your late game transitions when you get into those standoffs. Just accept that, like, okay, nobody can do anything, this is fine. I'm going to switch into something that will be able to do something eventually, especially when they start to mine out and starve. So start to transition into a lot of starports, a lot of battlecruisers, and by a lot I mean probably like 4 starports, maybe 2 with tech labs and 2 with reactors, because you do need to balance your Viking, Raven, battlecruiser, sometimes Banshee production, so you just want to switch into a different composition for sure. This person has some pretty general questions. Do mules attack? Do they mine faster or more from the gold? And does Gasket Miner get mined faster or more from the gold? No, mules do not attack. They do not mine faster from the gold. They mine at the same rate as the blue minerals, so actually it's a little bit of a waste, because I believe it decrements the minerals more than you actually return when you mine mules on there. So it's actually wasteful to mine mules from the gold. And does gas get mined faster or more from the gold? No, it's the same rate as any other ones. You'll know if something mines faster as far as gas if it says high yield geyser. Those are super rare. This person says, hey, I'm a gold Zerg and I like to play macro style. I die a lot to harassment, particularly in ZVT, to either Hellions or Banshees or both. I try to scout his main with my second Overlords, but sometimes it gets killed by Marines. If I don't have spores or a lair in time, I just straight up die to a Cloak Banshee. Would you recommend always building a spore per mineral line at like 6 minutes if I still can't get a scout in to be safe? Yeah, that's pretty much the Zerg panic button. Like if they say, I have no idea what's going on, just add a spore at each base, because it's a lot better to waste the drone and the money on spores and not need it when you don't know, versus just dying against something that you don't have any preparation for. They say, if I scout Hellions, I try to wall off my ramp with 2 Evo chambers and place roaches on hold position in the gap to stop them from getting in, but I don't always have that ready in time. I find it so annoying when like 1 or 2 Banshees gets into my main and kills like all my workers. Do you have any more tips for me? Yeah, so whenever you're playing ZVT, you want to really rely on a lot of Queens early game, and that's because Queens can heal each other. They're really fat, they can fill a lot of holes in terms of Evo chamber walls and stuff like that. They can spread creep, which you definitely need, considering if you need to swap between bases or if you need vision. You need to creep pushed out there as far as possible. And plus, having 4 Queens versus a Banshee is a lot better than just having 1, because you could just lose that fight and then all of a sudden you're stuck. So you definitely want to open up with a lot of Queens in ZVT. I would say if you really want to get crazy, you could go up to 6 or 8 Queens, and then just disperse them to spreading creep or injecting bases as the game goes on. But it's good for them because they're mineral only. They can heal each other, and all the units you're going to be seeing at that stage of the game are going to be pretty low damage output anyway. It's not like you're going to be hitting a bunch of Stim Marines or something like that against your queens, which will definitely die. And then you can kind of skip that roach phase, so you don't have to go roaches if you don't want to. You can just go for 6 or 8 queens, and then switch into, you know, lair, baneling speed, mutalisks and stuff like that if you want to play a more standard style. This person says, "Hey Magnet, here's a noob question. In 2013 I was like high bronze, and a week ago I did my placements for the second time and suddenly was ranked gold. Now I didn't play much Starcraft 2 in between 2013 and now, so I haven't really become a better player yet. The only people I'm playing right now are high gold to low diamond, and I stand no chances at all. They started instantly surrendering games. Does that even work, and what would you suggest?" So they actually changed the league balance a lot so that most new players are going to wind up in gold pretty soon. So being in gold is about the standard for most. I think the population of players playing StarCraft, 40% or something like that are in gold league, or it's something weird like that is how they balance it out, just to kind of make people feel like, okay, I'm decent at the game, I'm not going to be stuck in bronze forever. But then once you start to work out of that is when the game starts to get a little bit harder. So I would say just play. And something that I've noticed with StarCraft especially is is that a lot of people seem to be afraid to play against people that are better than them and lose, which it can be annoying, partially because there's not a lot of interactions throughout the game. Like, you could play a better player and see them once and get killed and not understand why. So if you're playing better players, I'd spend more time watching replays and figuring out why they were playing better than you were, or if they had a bigger economy or better unit compositions and stuff. Accept those games against those better players. If you lose, whatever, your MMR is going to change, and you'll play against more appropriate competition. Plus, you're also playing in an era of StarCraft where the ladder population is actually really low, and that's because everyone's waiting for Legacy of the Void to come out. So it'll change a lot in the next little bit, but just keep playing games, watch your replays to see what you're doing wrong and how you can do better, and you'll eventually kind of start to learn more, and then by the time the population picks up, the games will feel easier because you'll have a lot easier opponents. A lot of older players will return to play Legacy of the Void or to play Heart of the Swarm to get ready for Legacy of the Void and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd just play your games, try to learn as much as you can. It can be annoying, but you'll balance out eventually. This person says, "Why are there new maps every season? Does it encourage new strategies or tactics in order to favor certain races, or is it simply aesthetic purpose? Terran Mech and Legacy of the Void..." Let's see. Let me answer the first one first. So, as far as new maps, they definitely want to mix it up because in the first maybe 1 or 2 months of a map's lifespan, people don't really know how the map works 100%. So you'll see a big variety of strategies, and then as the map's life goes on, you start to see those strategies get whittled down to very few, and it starts to get really boring. So part of the reason they introduce new maps is to encourage people to try new stuff and to have a new place for strategies to live. Aesthetic purpose, I don't think that has any bearing. They kind of will do certain maps to favor certain races if they're not performing well, but they'll also purposefully try to make maps that will patch out problematic parts of the game. So, for example, if you think back to like spring of 2013, a lot of those games were blink all-ins, and it was like blink all-in every game. Maybe not that far, maybe later in 2013. Every single game from Protos was a blink all-in, and that's because the maps just gave it to them. There was maps like Heavy Rain or Yonsu that just said there's a huge area for blink all-ins to happen, so you might as well just blink all-in every game. And now you don't really see that anymore because the maps are totally different. They don't allow for strategies to be like that anymore because that era was really bad for the game. Just seeing every single Protoss just be like, oh, blink all-in, or oh, fake blink all-in to get ahead. It was pretty silly, so they'll a lot of times make new maps to patch out silly strategies from the game. Terran Mech and Legacy of the Void seems to be really powerful, while Bio didn't have any changes. Isn't it a hard choice between Bio or Mech, or one build, or is one build still more favored? No idea yet. Honestly, the Mech in Legacy of the Void hasn't really gotten a lot more powerful in the sense that they didn't really get any new tools, but they did get new mechanisms to make mech work. So for example, immortals are weaker, you can move tanks around faster, which I guess is kind of a buff, but they didn't really get a whole lot of new units. And I think they've been saying this for a while, that Terran mech doesn't really need more units, it just needs more encouragement to be played. And they do this subtly throughout StarCraft, in the sense that they see something that's going to be good, and they say, you know, this is going to be good, but we need to give you guys a reason to use it. So, for example, what they did was they changed something on, I think it was the Infestor. A really long time ago, they changed the Infestor to do something, and everyone was like, whoa, Infestors are so good. And then they just changed it back to how it was, and people were still like, whoa, Infestors are so good. So there's a lot of things still in the game that a lot of people don't use simply because they're just not common. It's not just that they're not good, they're just not common. So I think they're trying to find ways in Legacy of the Void to make people want to play mech. And mech is good, it's just not very used right now. So there's a lot less reward for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Okay, this is the last set of questions, and they're all from one guy, and his name is that guy with a long username. He says, I play Protos and I have a few questions. If I open DTs, how should I defend an Immortal All-In? They can get an Observer easily. Immortal All-Ins in PvP are not really a thing. They're really vulnerable to force fields, so you could do something like grab your own Immortals. If you're typically going to be opening up with a faster Robo Bay, or rather Robo Facility with a DT Shrine anyway, so you could get your own Immortals and Sentries and Zealots and just laugh at them as you force field back half their army dies to Zealots, and then you can deal with them pretty easily. This person says, when should I switch to Sky Toss? I know that late game is ideal to switch to Sky Toss, but when should the switch happen? It depends on the matchup, and it depends on the state of the game. You don't necessarily have to switch to Sky Toss, but it is going to be the longer term better solution for games against Protoss and games against Zerg, not so much against Terran, unless you're switching into like 6 Tempest just to pick off Ghost or something. So you don't have to if you don't want to, but you can only really start to afford a true Sky army with any race once you're on 4 bases worth of gas. So I'd say anything beyond 4 bases when you can start to think about switching, and just kind of do it as naturally as possible. Like, for example, if you're playing PvP and the other person's on double Robo Colossus, you could be like, oh, I can either try to compete with this double Robo Colossus, or I can try to just switch hard into Sky Toss and make those worthless. This person also says, question 3, I really like in PvZ to do the Warp Prism Zealot Sentry attack and then block my opponent's ramp while I get DTs. Any tips? And I also like Blink. So Blink you can do anything with. You can be aggressive with it, or you can be defensive with it. For the most part, it's to hold a third base. The ramp block opponents is really good, actually, if you can get that going, but it is very gimmicky in the sense that if they see it coming and just split their units on one half of the ramp versus the other half, then your whole strategy's ruined. So that's going to be pretty rough. As far as DTs, especially in PvZ, they're also pretty gimmicky as well. But you just have to accept that any Warp Prism based Sentry attack in PvZ is going to be gimmicky in one way or another. So if you want to try to just make it work, especially depending on what league you're in, you could try to leave a pylon on the map, warp in some Zealots at a pylon over near like their third base or something just to attract their army, knowing that those Zealots aren't going to do anything, and then fly your Warp Prism in and try to drop it off and block off the ramp. So that's probably the best way you're going to be able to do that. Try to distract them and push them out of position, and then kind of trick them into being on the wrong side of the ramp. This person also says, question 4, with the new Ravager, I think Protoss has a huge disadvantage. Okay, I don't know about how that's going to work out yet, but in general, I'd say probably. Usually, if the Zerg makes a lot of Zerglings, you can get Colossus and force field the Zerglings so they don't get on your Colossus. And that's not going to exist anymore. I think that in Legacy of the Void, PvZ is going to be terrible. Will Zerg be able to expand so fast, and the Protoss... Zerg will be able to expand so fast, and Protoss will not be able to keep up. Also, is Sky Toss going to even be viable with a new Parasitic Bomb? So, Sky Toss always has Templar in it anyway, and I think you're going to see a lot faster motherships, and you're going to see a lot more feedbacks under the protection of Cloak if people are going for Sky Toss. So, I think it's still going to be viable in the sense that you could kind of trick people with forward Cloak Dark Templar and kind of pick off a whole bunch of Vipers before anything even happens. So I think faster motherships are going to be a thing, considering you're going to get a lot faster gases. And those are going to be able to cloak your support units like Templar or like Tempest, or whatever else you're rolling with that. So I think it'll be okay. As far as being able to expand so fast and Protos not being able to keep up, I think Blink is actually going to be even more common than it is now in PvZ, because if you think about Ravagers, they basically rely on people either not microing by either not having the ability to micro or abusing force field based strategies. Blink typically doesn't care about any of that. Blink is typically like, I'm just going to abuse the fact that you can't kill any of my units for a really long time. And if the Ravagers are trying to drop, the mortars on top of the army, you can blink out of that easier than you can do it with any other unit. So I think Blink is going to be fine against Ravager builds for the time being, so we're just going to have to see how that all works out. But yeah, we're going to have to see more creative stuff against Zerg. Things like really cute multi-prong harassments, or taking advantage of the Oracle stasis in some way or another is going to be definitely a thing. So we're going to have to see how that all works out. But it's too early to say if any race has a real advantage. I do think Zerg got the coolest and probably most interesting tools, so they might be the most strong right now, but it's super early beta, so it's going to change a lot between then and now. So thanks for watching, guys. 35-minute video. Sorry for the length of it, but like I said, this is likely going to be my last Q&A for a little while, namely because I'm going to have a lot more interesting videos for you guys to watch, as the Legacy of the Void beta is supposed to start tomorrow. So if I don't get in on the first wave, which I'm still not totally sure what their criteria is, but I was pretty sure that BlizzCon people got the first wave. But if I'm not able to log in, I'm going to jump on some streams of people that are actually playing it, and I'm going to try to get replays from them, so at the very least we'll have some games to look at and talk about as far as what's going on. So either way, we'll have something coming up in the near future, so stay tuned. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll talk to you guys real soon.